So, the E60 M5, one of the best sounding M cars ever produced by BMW, and yet, these are the reasons why you shouldn't buy one. Let's get into it. So, the BMW M5, specifically the E60, came out in 2005, had a V10 engine, 5 litre, codename S85 V10. It came in the UK and in Europe as a 7-speed SMG III transmission. Now the transmission itself, once you worked out how to use it, is actually okay. Not too many problems there. There are some cases of them failing, but we'll get into that later on. In America, however, North American market, they got the 6-speed manual, and I wish that existed in the UK. But anyway, during its 5-year production run, they produced just under 21,000 units, of which a majority, 19,000 plus, were saloon or sedan, as they call it over the pond, and about 1,000 were touring. Now, this is another thing. This was the last M5 to come as a touring, i.e. in a state. After that, there had just been saloons after that. And at the time, this body shape was designed by a guy called Chris Bangle. And in that era of BMW, people weren't very happy with the design. But I think time has been very kind for this design, and I think he took a lot of stick for this design at the time. But looking back at it, you see an E60 M5 on the road, and you actually think, that looks good. Now, at the time, putting a V10, a 5 litre V10 into a saloon car, that was a production first. The V10 petrol engine, that was a production first into a nice, comfortable, luxury saloon. And people genuinely said this is a race car engine stuck in an executive car. People could not believe that this existed. And to us, the technology it came with, the throttle response, the actuators, just the automated manual transmission, the shifts were getting quicker, they were getting better. People were finding that they could adjust the suspension, they could adjust the power, because the max power is 507 horsepower, but they could change it. There's 3 driver selectable engine modes, P400, P500 and P500S. At the time, people, on TV shows and stuff were saying there's too much choice, there's too much selection, or the iDrive system's this and that. But really, it gave the basis of what's available on your normal everyday hatchback now. This whole selectable drivable modes, changing the power, changing the ferocity of the gear change, all of that. At the time, people complaining, saying there's too much choice, why do you need that, just have one setting. But if you look at all new cars now, especially anything remotely sporty, they have all these options. So really, it's sort of, I wouldn't say this started it, but this made it more mainstream. Now, this car had, it was amazing. It was quick, it was elegant, 0 to 60, 4.7, but to be honest, people managed to get it down to 4.1, 4.2 stock. And people, even though it's electronically limited, limited to 155 miles per hour, people managed to get 190 plus. And really, at the time, it was a really sought after car. And yet, I wouldn't buy one. As much as I love it, as much as I'm praising it, I would not buy one. And these are the reasons why. Its reliability is awful. Honestly, there's a reason why these are on the market in the UK, and you can pick one up for like 12, 13 grand. There's a reason why. They just break. I'm not kidding. They just do. It's just the engine. It's a race car engine. As we know, race car engines do not last. How many times we've seen F1 or the racing championships that they have to replace the engine? They just do, and they have to do these things. There's issues with this car. The actuator fails, paddle's not working, the clutch position sensor is prone to faults, especially on the older models. And and if you want to get that changed to BMW, that's about £2,800. You have problems with the clutch itself. There's people complaining about slow gear changes, SMG, sometimes due to SMG software, which can be quick fix, or pump failure. pump failure, you're looking at about £1,000. The usual VANOS issues you have, nothing extra with this specific M5, but just that era of BMW had VANOS issues. I mean, and it used to consume a lot of oil, and the oil was not cheap, it was quite expensive. And in general, the parts like the rear disc and pads, you're looking at between £1,500 to £1,800. This is the UK, so it might be different where you are. But again, the cost of stuff like consumables, like brake pads and discs, you can put those into, you know, you can counter them in to the cost of the car. But stuff like the clutch failing, there's been people that have had the clutch failing within 40,000-50,000 miles. Shouldn't be doing that, really shouldn't. It's a common failure. And then you have the throttle position actuator, you've got, you know, the cost of oil, people have had failures of the gearboxes. It's just, it all adds up, and I genuinely would not buy one. I've seen people on other YouTube channels like Hoovy's Garage, other channels as well, and they just, everyone says just run, unless you got one on a BMW warranty. As nice as it is, the idea of picking up a 5 litre V10 monster of a car, it's just, it has so many problems. It just don't, I wouldn't go there. It's one of those things where they seem nice from a distance. It's nice to dream about it. It's nice to think that, oh, the idea, the concept, to visualize it. But then the reality of actually owning one is really difficult. It's not an easy car at all. I wouldn't buy one, and I don't suggest you buy one either. It's one of those cars, you know. The general running costs of such cars are expensive, and you can go through countless threads on the internet where you go piston heads, BMW forums, anywhere you'll see people saying, I've had problems. You know, clutch, flywheel, fuel pump replacement, VANOS solenoids, the DME module, PDC sensors, and the park distance control. And that's not just a one-time thing. People have had that problem happen again and again. It's like the list goes on, and it really did put people off. And to top that all off, yes, it's a car that's designed to possibly munch the miles, because it's such a big heavy car. It's not really designed for cornering as much. If you want something more nimble for cornering, you get what, an M3 is a bit smaller, a bit narrower. So this is good for like long distances. But then the fuel tank, people was lucky to get 180 miles out of a fuel tank. It literally had a thimble for a fuel tank, and I don't understand. I still to this day do not understand. I couldn't live with that, having to fill up every 180 miles, and that's not driving like a lunatic. That's driving remotely, sedately, not putting your foot down everywhere. Putting your foot down everywhere, you're probably lucky if you get 120 miles or 100 miles. So I would say it's something to bear in mind. But if you can find an M5, an E60 M5 cheap enough, and you've got a pot of money, let's say 5k, 6k per year to the side, to say, okay, if something goes wrong, because remember, a lot of these problems aren't guarantees. You might not have these issues. You might have all of them in 1 year and then have nothing the following year. Or you might be really unlucky and have the same problem happen to you twice in 2 years. So if you have that 5 or 6k set aside for that year, or however many years you own it, each year that you have it, you might actually enjoy this car. And don't get me wrong, when it's working, I heard everyone says it's a fantastic car. It's just the reliability. And I think it's a real shame. And I think it's a real shame that after that BMW went really civilised with their cars. Especially with the M10 M5, it just became really, I don't know, just, it grew up a lot in more ways than one. The interior was lovely in the F10 and M5. That's something that's good, but then everything else around it, if you compare to the E60, just felt a bit, I don't know, a bit boring. And it's not the F10's fault, it's just what preceded it. an actual race car, pretty much. Transmission and drivetrain preceded it, and then it's like a follow-up. It's like if you have to follow up on a band that's been on stage, like the Rolling Stones or something, it's like, how do you follow up on that? If AC/DC on stage and you have to go up afterwards, like, well, how do I do that? And I think that is the issue, and I think it's a real shame. And I do think they will be classics one day. There will be a future. It will be a future classic. I think one day, once there's not that many around and they become uneconomical to repair, they will be kept under lock and key. You know, they'll be kept safe, warm, you know, dry garages, just to sitting there, not putting any miles put on them, which is a real shame. But then I'd understand because of the cost of replacing consumable. So yeah, that's the E60 M5 for you. Let me know what you think. Please like, subscribe and comment, and I'll see you next time.